Alexandra Dirks. I'm one of the interns at JASP this summer. And hello and welcome to the Recognizing Jane Austen workshop. A couple of things before we start. The workshop tonight is going to be working through different elements of, as you can see in the title, and Lesley will definitely introduce us there, creating a scene, and then we will have until May 11th to refine and expand your scene into a short story. I think the website currently says less than 3,000 words. We're thinking very, very short story, maybe even less than 1,000. Yeah, and so we currently have 3 judges, and it's going to be judged based on a few different categories: relevance to Jane Austen's writing, the effectiveness of the story, overall coherence, detail, and word choice, and then also just originality. You know, we want you to have fun with it and learn a little something about Austen and 18th century literature along the way. Tonight we have Lesley Peterson, who did a similar workshop last year about rants and raves in Austen, I believe. Was that the title?
That's right. Yes.
Right. And so, yeah, now I will pass it off to Lesley.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be able to kickstart this creative writing contest, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what people produce. This is a writing workshop, and it can be done virtually. I know that because I've done virtual writing workshops before, although it is a little weird. But we've got this. We're Janeites. So the way I've set it up is that we're going to start by doing a fair amount of reading of some short excerpts from different texts, most of them 18th century ones that Jane Austen definitely knew, and then from her own parody of those texts, which are all recognition scenes. And we'll start, of course, by defining what a recognition scene is. Jane Austen wrote her own hilarious takeoff of the recognition scene in Love and Friendship. And Love and Friendship, I don't know if everybody has had a chance to read it yet. I believe that JASP is making it available. And it's in, of course, all of the collections of Jane Austen's teenage writing that you can buy prior to the Jane Austen summer program beginning itself. Jane Austen finished writing Love and Friendship in 1790. So she would have been just 14 years old then. Her birthday is in December. She finished this in June. So she was born in 1775, but she hadn't turned 15 yet when she finished this. And it's one of her best known works of juvenilia, of teenage writing. And it deserves to be really well known because it's not only hilarious, it's brilliant. But we can analyze that brilliance to a certain extent. We can take the clock apart to see what makes it tick, and then we can put it back together again and build our own clocks. So after we've looked at some of these writing models, then we're going to work through 7 steps that will lead you to producing your own completely original 18th century style recognition scene. And then the text that we look at the beginning will not only introduce those 7 steps, they will also be there for you to revisit as writing models when you're going back and revising the draft. You should finish with like pretty much a complete draft by the end of this evening, and then you've got time to polish it up. So, whoops, better turn off my phone. So we'll do that, and let's go on to the next slide. This is Jane Austen's recognition scene from Love and Friendship. And I'm going to read it all out loud. I've highlighted some of the really significant language by putting the text in a different color, but it's worth hearing as a whole, I think. It happens about, 2/3 of the way through the story. And what has happened is that the narrator of this epistolary novel, it's all written in letters, is talking about a time when she and her best friend, Sophia, are on the road and they stop at an inn and just happen to bump into their long lost grandfather. So Laura writes, our attention was attracted by the entrance of a coroneted coach and four into the inn yard. A gentleman considerably advanced in years descended from it. At his first appearance, my sensibility was wonderfully affected, and ere I had gazed at him a second time, an instinctive sympathy whispered to my heart that he was my grandfather. Convinced that I could not be mistaken in my conjecture, I instantly sprang from the carriage I had just entered, and following the venerable stranger into the room he had been shown to, I threw myself on my knees before him and besought him to acknowledge me as his grandchild. He started, and after having attentively examined my features, raised me from the ground and, throwing his grandfatherly arms around my neck, exclaimed, acknowledge thee! Yes, dear resemblance of my Lorena and my Lorena's daughter, sweet image of my Claudia and my Claudia's mother, I do acknowledge thee as the daughter of the one and the granddaughter of the other. And within about 4 minutes, this gentleman discovers 3 more of his grandchildren that have all met at this inn. So it's ridiculous, but it's got pretty much all the ingredients of the 18th century recognition scene. So we'll move on to the next slide. The original recognition scene, if there is such a thing as a first in stories, has to be Oedipus Rex by Sophocles. So this is not 18th century, but it's one of the foundational texts that 18th century recognition scenes are working from. So to look at Sophocles, we have to ask ourselves, what do these writers mean by recognition? And that takes us to Aristotle, who says that recognition is a change from ignorance to knowledge, that is, knowledge about a relationship or about the protagonist's true self. And this recognition, this change from ignorance to knowledge, produces love or hate between the persons destined by the poet. That's you tonight. You're all the poets for good or bad fortune. There are other kinds of recognition in pretty much any story you read. Some famous examples from Jane Austen's mature novels would include the moments in Pride and Prejudice where Lizzie recognizes that she has been blind and has completely misunderstood Darcy and has misrecognized his character. And Darcy also has his moments of recognition as well when he recognizes that he has been proud, and before that recognizes that Elizabeth Bennet is the person he wants to marry. So Oedipus Rex is special because it came first. And here is a scene, and it's from a play, and it's a little bit of a different recognition scene because the conversation is not between Oedipus and either of his parents. As you recall, Oedipus marries his mother and murders his own father by mistake, not knowing who his real parents are. And this is when he finds out that his real mother and father abandoned him as a baby because of a prophecy. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Alex. Would you read this scene with me? Would you be Oedipus and I'll be the shepherd?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. Start us off, please.
What? Was it she who gave it?
Yea, O king.
And to what end?
To make away with it.
And dared a mother?
Auguries dark she feared.
What were they?
E'en that he his sire should kill.
Why then didst thou to this old man resign him?
I pitied him, O master, and I thought that he would bear him to another land.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. All cometh clear at last.
Yes. Thank you. So these are all the main ingredients of a recognition scene. The parent believes the child is dead. The child believes the non-parent is his or her parent. Both are unaware of their real bond when they meet. And this next one is quite important, something to think about when you're planning your own scene, but don't panic because we'll come back to it. The parent has high status, but the child has been humbly raised. And yet the child has always acted according to his or her true status. In the case of Oedipus, he and his father fought on the road when they met because they were really too much alike, both very proud and kingly, and neither of them would move aside. And then we have a story of why they were separated and how they found each other. And that story is usually extremely complicated. And recognition occurs in a number of different ways. It occurs, as in this case, through testimony of those involved, and they are usually lower class. Recognition also occurs through physical evidence. In Oedipus's case, he has a scar on his feet. The name Oedipus means sore foot, because when he was a baby, they put a spike through his feet so he couldn't crawl away when they abandoned him to the wolves. Yeah, brutal. So those are a lot of those things are what we're going to be looking for and finding in the 18th century recognition scenes as well. And when they meet, the reactions are very physical, very emotional. And here we can just see the beginning of Oedipus's strong reaction with that whoa, 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 whoa at the end. And we know he's going to do dire things to himself, and so will his mother. But let's move on because we want to focus on comedy today. There will only be one other example of a tragedy. Okay. Another example that Jane Austen would have been familiar with is Shakespeare's play, The Winter's Tale. And this is a recognition scene, classical with a happy ending. And I don't think I'll read the whole thing out loud to you. In this passage that I've quoted, two minor characters are reporting the conversation that they have just witnessed, in which the king Leontes and discovers that this young shepherdess from Bohemia who has just walked into his court is actually his long lost daughter, Perdita, whom he thought was dead. And then they just list all the different proof, which in this case includes a lot of physical objects. Queen Hermione's mantle, her jewel around the neck of the baby, and so on, that proved her identity. So once again, we have elements that are starting to look very familiar. The parent has high status, the child is humbly raised. Neither is aware of true relationship when they meet, but the father feels an instant affinity, and yes, it's an attraction. So there's that possibility of incest that comes up quite often in these recognition scenes, and you can put that into yours or leave it out completely. It is optional, but it does happen a lot because he doesn't know this is his daughter and she's beautiful. So bad things can happen. And this is why people really need to know who their real children are and who their real parents are. The child was raised as a shepherdess, but she has always acted like a princess. The story of why they were separated and how they found each other is again extremely complicated and highly improbable. This is not a realist text. If you're not familiar with the play, look up the plot summary, and it's pretty wild. And then again, recognition occurs partly through the testimony of those involved. In this case, the shepherd who found her as a baby and raised her and says, yeah, she's not mine, I found her. And it also occurs through physical evidence. And again, the reaction is very physical, very emotional, as these men describe. There was casting up of eyes, holding up of hands, with countenance of such distraction. So when you're looking at 18th century texts, look for casting up of eyes and holding up of hands, these very dramatic gestures. Even if it's not a play, you're still going to find the authors describing these very dramatic gestures and as well as expressions. Okay, And as a result of this recognition, the child can now take her rightful place and marry into her proper rank. So one of the things to think about when you're writing your story is wrapping it up a little bit. What can happen now that the truth is revealed? What changes for these characters going forward? And we'll see some more examples of that. In Oedipus's case, the consequences are pretty dire, but here the consequences are very good. And again, incest is raised as a possibility, but in this case, it's avoided in time. Okay, and I should mention, just pause to say, anytime you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand, and or you can ask it in the Q&A, and then only Alexandra or I will see the question, or you can put it in the chat, and then everybody can see it. Now, here is, we've made it into the 18th century. This is a recognition scene that Jane Austen definitely knew, and it's from a play. Nobody ever puts it on today, and if you read it, you'll know why. It's a tragedy, but it was very, very popular in the 18th century. And in Mansfield Park, Tom and Edmund discuss reciting a famous speech from this play when they were boys. Now, that speech is not what I've put here, but "My name is Norval" is a famous speech. And as one of the speakers at JASP talked about in a recent article published in Persuasions, Susan Allen Ford has some very interesting things about that "My name is Norval" speech. And she points out that it was typically included in elocution books that boys practiced learning how to give speeches with. So it's very likely that Jane Austen's own brothers had to memorize and recite that speech from this play. So she would have known it very well. And the basic situation here is a kind of a Romeo and Juliet story. Lady Randolph was secretly married before to her family's enemy. She couldn't reveal their marriage. Then her husband died and she was pregnant, so had the baby in secret, gave him away in secret, lost him in a flood. He was rescued and raised by shepherds. And then this manly young man who is supposed to grow up to be a shepherd, but just wants to be a warrior. So his blood is, driving him towards that profession, saves the life of Lady Randolph's present husband. And that is how they meet. And somebody spying on their conversation sees how much she cares about him and suspects she's having an affair with this stranger when actually it's her son. So I'll just read some of the text that I've highlighted here. Lady Randolph explains, "I thought that the son of Douglas lived," and Douglas was her first husband. "As soon as I saw him, I thought that his son lived. If he had lived, he might have been like this young gallant stranger." And then she says, "A spark from fancy fell on my sad heart and kindled up a fondness for this young stranger." And then a prisoner, again, a minor lower class character, talks more about the boy and says he bore himself not as the offspring of our cottage blood, but night and day he talked of war and arms. And then they bring him in as a prisoner and he says, "My name is Norval, and my name he bears." And that prisoner is Norval's adopted father. And then Lady Randolph exclaims, "'Tis he himself, it is my son, oh sovereign mercy, 'twas my child I saw." So I'm making fun of this language, and I think I'm following Jane Austen's example and making fun of it. It's really extreme. So when you're writing your own recognition scene, this is one of the things that you can have a lot of fun to, is just let your characters just go nuts, as hysterical as they want to be. So again, I'll skip through this relatively quickly. We've seen so many of the elements before. The parent has high status, child is humbly raised. Neither is aware of true relationship when they meet, but the mother feels instant affinity for her son. The child has always acted like a warrior. the story of why they're separated and how they found each other extremely complicated and improbable. You can have a lot of fun with that if you want to, but that backstory is actually optional. And then the recognition occurs in the same different ways, through testimony of lower class witnesses, through physical evidence, in this case, not just his resemblance to his father, but the jewels, the wealth that was found in the cradle. And then the reactions are very physical and emotional. And the child should now take his rightful place and inherit his land, except his mother's current husband might not want to give it up. So she's scared to tell him right away. And then that delay is what leads to the tragedy. Okay, so this is definitely a play that Jane Austen knew, and she would have been familiar with it before she started to write Love and Friendship. Now, the single most significant influence on Love and Friendship, or one of the two most significant, is Fanny Burney's novel, Evelina. I'll just check. Any questions so far? No. Okay. Sabina has joined us. Welcome, Sabina. I'm glad you're here. We're going through some writing models, different examples of the 18th century recognition scene that inspired Jane Austen's own parody in Love and Friendship. And in fact, Fanny Burney really draws it out. There are actually two recognition scenes, but this is the second one, where Evelina finally meets her long-lost father. He has known of her existence and of her claim to be his legitimate daughter for years, but he has been refusing to acknowledge her, and nobody understands why, until we find out that she was swapped with another baby in her cradle, and he has been raising this other young woman thinking that she is his daughter. So again, very convoluted. Realism is not your goal here. Okay. So the father, Evelina has been escorted to her father's house by a mentor and companion, a Mrs. Selwyn, who leads her to her father. And if we look at the second paragraph, at the moment she sees her father for the first time, she recounts, "What a moment for your Evelina! An involuntary scream escaped me, and covering my face with my hands, I sunk on the floor." So we've had hands being raised and eyes cast up to heaven. Fanny Burney takes it to the next level. Now we've got Evelina collapsing onto the floor. She is that overcome. Her father can hardly speak. In a voice scarce articulate, he exclaimed, "My God, does Caroline Evelyn still live?" That's his wife and Evelina. I tend to give it the British pronunciation because that's just how I was taught, but you can say Evelina too. Either one is fine. And then we have a language that, if you'll recall from the passage in Love and Friendship, this is very familiar. Austen is really playing on this when Evelina's father says, "Lift up thy head, if my sight has not blasted thee. Lift up thy head, thou image of my long-lost Caroline." And she can't stand up. She writes, "Affected beyond measure, I half arose and embraced his knees while yet on my own." "Yes, yes," cried he, looking earnestly in my face. I see, thou art her child. She lives, she breathes, she is present to my view," and so on. And if you go back later and compare this text with Jane Austen's recognition scene in the opening slide, and you'll be able to see how Austen is imitating this language. Evelina has been raised humbly in the country by a vicar, but she has always acted like a lady. Again, the backstory is extremely complicated and improbable. Recognition occurs in a number of different ways, through testimony, through physical evidence of the appearance, and the reactions are very physical and emotional. And again, although it's a subplot, there is the possibility of incest here because Evelina's father was a bit of a player in his youth, and he has an illegitimate son who is Evelina's half-brother, who has fallen in love with the girl who was swapped for Evelina in her cradle and wants to kill himself because he realizes, he thinks that he is in love with his own half-sister once he discovers who his real father was. But then it all works out. He gets to marry her because it turns out they're not related. And Evelina can now take her rightful place in society and marry the wealthy and high status Lord Orville. Evelina and this play are the two texts that I would say, to my knowledge anyway, were the biggest influences on Love and Friendship. And this is a really important text because, like Love and Friendship, this is a satire. So Jane Austen is learning how to write satire from this play. It's called The Critic by Richard Brinsley Sheridan. And the evidence of its influence on her writing is very strong in a lot of different ways, but we'll just focus on the recognition scene here. It's the play is a play within a play. Puff is an author, and he has invited his friends to come with him to view the rehearsal of a play he has written. So all of the text that is in italics is those are lines in the play. Lady and son and justice and mother, those are characters in the play. And I have made a mistake. This line should have been in italics too. But Puff is outside the play, and he keeps interrupting the actors because his play is too long, and they keep cutting it and messing with his script. So this is a bizarre recognition scene. The child meets his parents because he's been brought in front of the Lord Justice as a thief. But he wants to be a soldier, and it turns out the justice is his actual father. And there's no evidence than just a lady. The lady just says, "Oh, I had a feeling. As soon as I saw this young boy," and I'm starting 3 lines down here in the purple text, "strange bodings seized my fluttering heart, and to myself I said, and if our Tom had lived, he'd surely been this stripling's height," which is a lot like what Lady Randolph says in Douglas about her long-lost son, Norval. And the son identifies himself very, very plain, working class name. "My name's Tom Jenkins, alias have I none, though orphaned and without a friend." And the lady just knows without any proof that he's her son. "How loudly nature whispers to my heart." And that lack of evidence, just knowing without evidence, is part of what makes this a parody. That these people are so sensitive, so intuitive, so brilliant, that they can recognize their own relative without any proof is part of what Sheridan is mocking. And then the proliferation of relatives is also part of what makes it funny. The justice says, "No orphan, nor without a friend art thou. I am thy father, here's thy mother, there's thy uncle, this is thy first cousin, and those are all your near relations." And Jane Austen took a page from this when she was writing her recognition scene, because her grandfather, Lord St. Clair, doesn't just meet one grandchild at that inn. He meets 4. "You're my granddaughter. Oh, you're my other granddaughter. And you're my grandson. Oh, and you're my grandson. Oh." And he basically says, I hope there are no more grandchildren out there for me to meet. And he buys them off, just gives them some money and runs. But anyway, here's Sheridan making fun of the convention. It's absolutely absurd. Can't be explained, and yet they're all completely sure of it. And then here's a line that, if you have read Love and Friendship, you might recognize. The stage direction at the end of this passage says, the justice's wife and their son faint alternately in each other's arms. In Love and Friendship, Jane Austen writes at one point, Laura recounts that she and her best friend Sophia fainted alternately on the sofa. So she has clearly borrowed that ridiculous kind of seesawing of fainting from the stage directions here. I think I've covered this. Yes, evidence is so here are two of the things that are different. Again, in a parody, the evidence is scanty. The author doesn't even pretend to make it plausible, and the huge extended family just suddenly appears. And also, because Puff is not a very good playwright, we never learn what's going to happen next. I've got two more passages here, and I won't spend too much time on them. They will be available for you to review when you go back. Here's another novelist, another, again, 18th century, not very well known at all now, but we do know that Jane Austen read them. They were probably borrowed from a circulation library. Eliza Nugent Bromley, she wrote sentimental love stories with ridiculous plots. And they were both published in the 1780s, so Austen would have read them just before she started writing Love and Friendship. And Bromley's first novel, Laura and Augustus, is interesting because those two names, Laura and Augustus, are both names that Austen gives to characters in Love and Friendship. But her second novel, Sir Charles Bentinck, also includes a recognition scene. This one's a little bit different. It's between a grandfather and a grandson. And in this case, the grandfather is the villain of the piece. He's actually kidnapped his own grandson. We've seen enough examples now. We're starting to get ready for step one, which is inventing your characters. We've met a lot of different characters, a lot of different basic relationships. You've got father-son, mother-son, father-daughter. Now we have grandfather-grandson. Those are all some of the different configurations. I don't think you're going to find a mother-daughter pairing very often in an 18th century recognition scene, because when both genders are women, status doesn't come into it nearly as much. 18th century status tended to reside with the father. So we're going to start thinking, through whose point of view are you telling this story? Do you want to write it in the first person, the epistolary novel, 18th century? This is an epistolary novel. It's told by the main character. Or it's by the grandson here in a letter. I was conducted to a superb apartment. Laura in Love and Friendship tells the story in the first person. This happened to me. You could write a play if that's what you like, but I would suggest sticking with prose. In fact, I strongly recommend sticking with prose, because writing plays, it's a very, very different set of challenges. The main decision, I think, then is, are you going to tell it in the first person or in the third person? If you're updating it to the 20th century, you might seriously consider telling it in the third person. He was conducted to a superb apartment. He felt a reverence for the old man arise in his bosom, that kind of thing. Because in the 21st century, third person narratives tend to be the default mode. It's what most people are used to. So we're starting on step one. You're going to get a rest from my voice in a second. Create your characters, give them names, and give them positions in life. Now on this screen, I've given you kind of a menu of some 18th century names that are either from Jane Austen's work or from texts that influenced her. In the case of Lord St. Clair, both. The grandfather in Love and Friendship is named Lord St. Clair, and there is a Lord St. Clair in another novel with a recognition scene that she knew that I'll mention later. If the parental figure is evil, make sure he's foreign. For the 18th century, British lit, Spanish, French, or Italian nationalities are always good for evil foreigners. So have a lot of fun with your names. I'll give you a couple of seconds now to just do some jotting. You just need 2 characters with a relationship. And they can be set right in your own backyard. You can make these characters Americans, or in my case, I might want to make them Canadians. Anything you like. Just have fun. Soap operas are a good source of names for stories like these. These are kind of, right? I'm not going to give you too much time, because if you have too much time, you might start rereading what you've written and judging it and critiquing it. And that's no good. We're just playing. We're just playing. You can change anything later. You've got till May. But for today, we're just playing. So let's continue to develop our characters. We've got your characters' relationships. We've got their names. Now let's think about their positions in life. Okay, we've already decided on the point of view, the focalizer, that's whose eyes we're seeing it through. And evidence that the child was, quote unquote, born to better things. So I've given you mine. Sorry. Let me just go back there. Okay. So I picked a grandfather, granddaughter. My grandfather is a plastic surgeon named Dr. Winston Everyoung, and my granddaughter was raised Susan Butt, but her real last name is Simone Rochester.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So it seems like these bizarre situations from like the 18th century literature depend a lot on kind of just like miscommunication.
Yes.
What would you recommend for trying to translate that into a more modern world where stuff like that maybe is less believable?
That is a great question. And I have 2 answers for it. It is completely optional, completely legitimate here to imitate Jane Austen. After all, she is, the who we are here to study, and refuse to explain it. Just give us this ridiculous, absurd, improbable situation, and it's so improbable anyway that any explanation would be so ridiculous. Why even bother? It's just presto, boom, it happened. And focus on that and just enjoy, just commit to the improbability of it and don't try to explain it. I think, though, that what I did when I came up with mine is I just kind of worked backwards. I thought, okay, here's this young woman who thinks her mother is this hairdresser, but actually her real mother gave her to this hairdresser friend to raise. I think we still do have a world where people get given up for adoption pretty often. I think we still have a world where, well, we have a world today where marriage breakups are much more common than they used to be. So in some ways, the possibility of losing touch with one or more parent and being raised by someone who's not your parent is maybe more common than ever. So I think there are lots of ways that we can imagine that happen, especially if the parent who if the parent is a rich man who maybe just couldn't be bothered, supporting his child. That happened a lot in the 18th century, and maybe it happens today too.
Yeah, great, thank you. Yeah,
you're welcome. And people have secrets. Communication is great. I think that, yeah, but people still have secrets. So does anybody feel inclined to share what they came up with? Anybody feeling brave enough to put it in the chat? Okay. Alex, do we need another minute? No. Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
Maybe I can try and share my idea
Oh, that
briefly.
would be, I'd love to hear it. Okay.
So I was thinking kind of maybe doing a play on the epistolatory by doing like a modern day, maybe like mailman worker that
Oh.
accidentally finds like an open letter, then the letter turns out to be from his long lost daughter, something.
Oh, cool. Okay. So he finds a letter, but it wasn't addressed to him. Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Ah,
And
uh-huh.
then kind of like I was asking about, maybe just like completely not answer any questions, just
Mm-hmm.
have some random karmic event.
Mm-hmm. 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 Okay, great. Kashfi or Sabina, does either of you feel brave enough to share what you've come up with? No? Should we go on? Oh, there's a question. Yay. Oh, Sabina says she needs a minute. I'm going to be quiet so people can write and think. Oh, apparently the chat has not been enabled. Alexandra, could you enable the chat? Or I can do, yeah. Oh, it looks like it's enabled. This says hosts and panelists can use it. Oh, yay, it's working.
There we
Okay,
go. Yeah. Thank
great.
you, Stina.
Thank you.
Great. All right.
Okay. I'm hoping that that question means that somebody soon will be willing to share. Sabina, did I give you enough time? Okay. If you can just speak. If you just want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to speak. Oh, yeah. 1 more minute. Okay, cool. Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay. Hello.
Hey.
Hi. First I just want to say that Sabina is my mom. My name is Anjali.
Oh, Anjali. Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, it's totally okay. I just don't know how to change my name on here. So
All right. Well, tell me how to spell your name.
ANJ
A-N. Sorry, A-N.
J
Uh-huh.
ALI.
Anjali. Okay, great. Welcome, Anjali. Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you. Yeah, my mom Sabina is here too.
Oh, excellent. Welcome, Sabina. So, Anjali, has either of you got an idea?
Yes, I do.
Oh, hey, let's hear it.
Okay, so I don't know. I'm fascinated by like color names, so I chose. How do you pronounce this? Fuchsia. Fuchsia. I chose fuchsia brown.
Ooh.
And then I'm still having a bit of trouble, but her mom is going to be doctor. Her biological mother is going to be Dr. Lizette Brown.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, she's a writer. And then her mama, her biological mama, is going to be Miss Violetta Brown, who's a language teacher. I don't really like the idea of doing like the child was born into better things like class stuff. And although it is still relevant today, I don't feel comfortable doing that. So I decided to do subjects, different types of subjects. So her adoptive grandparents are mathematicians. So yeah. So she's born into does that work, by the way?
I think so. Because it still means that she's being raised with values and ambitions that really just don't feel right for her. Is that where you're going with that?
Yes, that is.
Okay.
Yeah, so she's always had like a knack for languages and writing and stuff like that, when she's supposed to have a knack for like math and science and chemistry and stuff.
Right. Why don't you want to be a doctor, dear? Or an engineer, right? Oh, cool. Yeah, that's great. That's a lot of fun. I think you can go somewhere with that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Kashvi, unless you jump in, I'm just going to move on. But again, this will be visible. So some people just will be able to get more out of it when they can go through it on their own later without me talking and interrupting all the time. So let's see. We're preparing for step 2. Now we get to plan the moment of reunion. This is the discovery scene. In what situation do they meet? So there are 2 main choices. They can meet by plan. Oedipus realizes he doesn't know who his parents are. He becomes a detective. He wants to figure everything out. Insert Charles Bentinck, the grandfather, the evil villain. He plots. The grandson doesn't know anything about his grandfather, but the grandfather knows. So he locates and kidnaps his grandson. In Evelina, it happens by plan. More often, they meet by accident. They meet on the road, as in Love and Friendship, and also in Oedipus. In fact, the son saves the mother's second husband's life. That's Douglas. The son is arrested and brought before the father. The daughter comes to the father seeking assistance. The daughter falls in love with her half-brother, who tells his father about her, and the father realizes who she is. That's a subplot in Laura and Augustus. The son saves the life of the... Oh, and here's one I haven't mentioned. It's Anne Radcliffe's first novel, The Castles of Athlin and Dunbayne, and it also has a recognition scene in it, and it was published just before Jane Austen wrote Love and Friendship, and she borrowed one of her characters' names from it, so it's another model. And so do they meet by, does like the grandfather know about the grandson's existence, but not the other way around? Or is it a sheer accident? So mine is, they meet in the lobby of a vet's clinic. She has found his stray cat and got hold of him as the cat's owner. She is now waiting for him to arrive to claim it. So it's ridiculous, right? Great.
All right, yeah. So my idea was we had the mailman delivering. I've fleshed it out a little bit more. He's delivering letters, and he just miraculously recognizes the handwriting on a letter.
Oh.
And so the moment of reunion is planned because he hunts down the return address.
Oh, that's fantastic. So I'm assuming that the author of this letter has handwriting that is identical to her mother's handwriting or something like that, or
Yeah.
identical to the mailman's own handwriting.
Something, or like he recognizes it from when his daughter was a child, like it's still like childish handwriting or something like that. Because I
Some
think
little trick, maybe she always puts smiley faces to dot her eyes or something. Yeah, you could, yeah, I'm sure you'll have come up with a better idea than that. That's wonderful. Kashfi or Angelique. Okay, super. All right. We've got stories happening here. Very exciting. In planning that moment of reunion, I also invite you to think about that instant affinity. And Angelique, you're already ahead of the game here. You've got that. So a couple of examples are, what is the moment where one or both of them just feels like in their soul or in their heart, and it's completely irrational. In the 18th century, especially in the second half, with the culture of sensibility, the idea that sensitivity and intuition is so important. But here, so I came up with one where it's partly the cat's intuition. The cat let out the loudest mew I've ever heard, but the cat recognizes her owner. But, I looked up to see the door closing behind a man carrying an empty cat carrier, and I could not look away. Something about me just made me want to submit to his authority and trust him with every major decision in my life. How are you going to describe how that moment feels? Yeah, so time. I'm making your job difficult, Alex, sorry. Often it's recognizing how the person looks. And so take a moment to think about that.
pause it here.
Could you turn the recording on?
Yep. So my idea, I really liked the element of fainting. I think it's just like pure comedy. So I think the daughter, I've named her January.
Ooh.
Yeah. And then the father, I've named him Augusto. It's like so I think Augusto, the father, he comes and he's followed the return address, and January's looking out the window and she thinks it's just like some mailman. But I'm thinking she either recognizes some facial feature or just in general sees like a man in a mailman uniform, and every time she sees someone with that uniform, she thinks it's her father. And so she immediately faints and thinks it's her father.
Oh, cool. Cool. Yeah. Angeli, Kashfi, Sabina. Hey. So moving on, we're just about done step 2. How are you going to conclude that first meeting scene? Or pardon me, we're concluding step 2. So that meeting scene, we have the instant affinity, and it's a great idea to add a grand entrance. A lot of these recognition scenes include a grand entrance. So I've copied the grand entrance from the Jane Austen scene that we began with. Our attention was attracted by the entrance of a coroneted coach and 4 into the inn yard. A gentleman considerably advanced in years descended from it. So looking out the door or the window, or standing in the doorway and looking at a wealthy gentleman stepping down from a coach that's got a crown on the door. Big arrival moment. Doorways are great. Landings are also good. Coaches, the child brought in by guards. That's how Sheridan does it in the Critic. He can burst into the room carrying a sword. So it's just another way of making the moment really, really dramatic. So let's take another moment to think of a way to, if you want to add any details to your first sight description that might include some kind of an entrance. In my example, I had my narrator, Susan Butt, sitting in a lobby watching the people enter. And so her long lost grandfather makes that big entrance into the vet's waiting room, carrying the cat carrier. You can also make it funny by having somebody, trying to rush through a door and trip over the doorstep. You can make your entrances comical that way. Oh, Kashfi, why don't you unmute yourself, or do you want to put and read it out loud? Right, step 3, it picks up here. The first 2 steps are the longest because we have to prepare the foundation, but the remaining steps are quite fast. So now think of some physical evidence that one of them is going to discover, and that physical evidence can simply be an uncanny resemblance. In my case, spoiler alert, it's a scar on the side of her hand where Susan she was born with an extra finger, and she had her extra finger surgically removed, and it runs in the family. But physical evidence can be scars or birthmarks. In the castles of Athlone and Dunbayne, I've quoted it at length here, and you can come back to it later if you like, but her long lost son, the Baroness's long lost son, has a strawberry mark. It can be objects that were found with the body, jewelry. Often babies are found with the mother's locket with her picture in it around their neck, or documents, some kind of proof. So take a second now to think about your physical evidence. And I think what we'll do is go on to step 4, and then we can share steps 3 and 4 together. So I'm just going to move on. If anybody at any time wants me to go back and revisit a slide, just let me know. And this is my example of the physical evidence. As I mentioned, they have identical scars on the sides of their left hands. And step 4 is overwhelming emotions expressed physically. So trembling is really good, 18th century trembling. Inability to speak, that's really good, a good one. Feeling faint or dizzy, we've covered that. Crying out, oh, or whoa, falling to your knees, fainting, we've covered that. Throwing up hands, casting up of eyes, we've covered that. So we've got physical evidence and overwhelming emotions expressed physically. Let's take a moment now to work on those details.
Yeah, I realized I jumped ahead a little bit with my
Well, that's nothing to to apologize for, and you've seen all of these elements before, so there's, of course, you already know that this is what we were looking for, but this is just kind of a checklist. If you haven't had a chance to work in some of these details, you can do it now. Step 5 is human evidence, in other words, witnesses. So you might not need this. We do live in a world where there's lots of documentation, lots of ID, lots of paperwork. Everybody's life has a paper trail, but maybe there are witnesses who can help prove the child's identity when the time comes. It's typically either the person who took the baby from its parent, or it's the person who found the baby, or it could be the friend who received a letter about the baby. So is there a third person who can come into this scene to say, yes, it's true? And
I was thinking maybe like, I just started the recording again. My question was if the witness needed to be human. I was thinking maybe there's like a pet that seems to recognize the person.
Oh my goodness. Wow, yes. Yeah. And that kind of recognition is ancient. That goes back to Homer. There's when Odysseus comes home to Ithaca after 20 years away, it's his old dog who recognizes him. Yes, that's lovely. Sure.
And then it's kind of like a mini recognition in itself there.
It is. Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, so I might think about that.
I'm having step 6, I guess, is what happens now? How is the child elevated in status? Or how is the child's status changed? How is the child's future secured? If this is a happy ending, how are things going to be better for the child going forward because she or he has now been reunited with his or her real parent or grandparent? So let's think a little bit about what's going to happen. In the 18th century, it meant marriage to a wealthy man for the heroine, but it doesn't have to.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is something not changing an option as like?
It absolutely is, if you're writing a spoof. And that's exactly what Jane Austen did in Love and Friendship. There's this incredibly unbelievable, ridiculous recognition scene with not just one grandchild, but 4, and then nothing really changes. You've had this huge dramatic moment, and then the grandfather says, here's 50 pounds each. And I've got that quotation here. Then I will provide for you all without farther delay. Here are 4 banknotes of 50 pounds each. Take them, and remember, I have done the duty of a grandfather. He instantly left the room, and immediately afterwards the house. So basically, he buys his grandchildren off. He goes back to his old life. And yes, they are each 50 pounds richer. And yes, that was a lot of money back then. But they steal it or squander it, and really, it doesn't make a big difference in the long run. So we build up to this, and then, yeah, absolutely.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. That's a great question.
Oh,
I'm gonna also, this is the final step and it's also optional. But I've listed here some of the typical mysteries that underlie the plots that contain these recognition scenes. And so this is a way of coming up with that ridiculous, convoluted, improbable backstory. Here are some of the typical possibilities to consider. And beside them, I've included the works that Jane Austen would have been familiar with. So did at least one parent die, or was the child kidnapped? Did the father abandon the mother? Was the child the product of a secret Romeo-Juliet style marriage and had to be kept hidden? Did all of these things can happen today? Did the child's parent reject the grandparent and run away, and then the grandparent disowned the parent? That can certainly happen. Did somebody change their last name or move away? This happens all the time in 18th century novels, but even Jane Austen's brother had to change his last name when he was adopted by a wealthy family. And then again, I've mentioned Hollywood actors are always changing their last names. Is the child believed dead? Was the child swapped at birth with another? Has the child been at risk of committing incest or suspected of it as a result? So those might prompt some inspiration.
Yeah, so this one, I think because I took a different route a little bit, I'm struggling with it, but I'm thinking there might be something that I could do with the backstory being revealed by what's in the box, maybe. So
Right.
I was thinking like maybe do something just completely ridiculous, and it's like her mother is in the box and that's why she fell over, or maybe there's just
Or maybe it's just her mother's wooden leg.
something silly like that.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
It's like
Yes.
a letter explaining whatever happened, or
Right.
no explanation, just like a wooden leg, and maybe she knows what this means.
Right. Yeah, no, that's great. And I'm really liking the idea of this moment not having any effect on either character's lives. It's like this young woman, she's her own person, and really who her father is just really doesn't change anything for her because she already is her own person. So I think you can have a lot of fun with that. That's great. Yeah. Oh, and Matt, the possibilities of what you could put in that box just it's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
So,
could we not?
So this is my backstory, and I'll leave it to you in case you care. And it's ridiculous. So that's all I'll say about that. I won't read it to you, but you can revisit it if you want. If you are going to do one, though, I encourage you to really commit and make it as convoluted and as improbable as you can. Realism is not the goal here. It's about miracles, really. So now we're pulling it all together. We've got characters. You've planned, you know who they are. You've planned the moment of reunion. You've planned physical evidence. You've planned for the overwhelming emotions expressed physically. You've got the human evidence. And then you have an ending where the child is restored to her rightful place and her future assured, or else she just goes on as normal because who cares? And then, sorry, I can't number. This is 7, not 6. I've got 2 step 2s. Sorry about that. So, and I'll just show you what I did here because I wanted to point out that these 2 parts that are in brown text, these 2 parts that are in brown text, that's just jotting. That's not complete sentences and paragraphs. And if I were developing this into a full story, then that's what I would want to go back and flesh out later. I would actually write that conversation. We don't have time to do that today, but you do have time to just, go through all the steps and just make your notes. So I'll just give people 1 minute to look over the 7, not 6 steps, and just make sure that they've got everything covered.
I suppose I have a question.
Yes.
So if we are trying to expand this original scene into more of a story, do you have any advice about that? Or maybe is it just expanding like the effects of this scene? Or what would you maybe focus on if you wanted to lengthen this?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the most obvious place to lengthen it would be if you want to have a backstory, because then you have to find a way to have that backstory explained kind of in that moment. Because if you've decided that your characters need an explanation and need some kind of proof, then they can't kind of move on with embracing their new relationship until that has been established. So bringing in the human witness, where then there's a conversation where maybe a little bit of an interrogation actually becomes necessary, or else simply the adoptive parent says, oh, let me go out to my car. I always carry around in my trunk the bag of objects that came with this baby when she was given to me, and here they are, and do you recognize any of them? So to bring the evidence forward, if that's going to happen, it really has to happen in this scene. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So maybe like expand it towards the end, but also give maybe some more context in the beginning.
Yes. You could setting it up a little bit more, definitely. Yep. For the ending, you don't need to really expand the ending. I came up with an ending. Dr. Everyoung pays for Susan to train as an interior decorator. She goes into partnership flipping houses with her real estate love, because she's always wanted to be an interior decorator instead of a hairdresser, but she couldn't get the training, and now she can. And that can be very short. You could build it up at the beginning a little bit more if you wanted to have some foreshadowing. For instance, in the case of recognizing the locket, you can always go back to the beginning and work in some references to that locket. Maybe the young woman has a habit of fingering her locket whenever she's nervous and she doesn't know why. And you could mention that locket earlier on, but then make us wait to find out what it is or what it means. So that's a really great way to give coherence to your piece, is to take a detail that maybe only becomes significant at the end, but sneak in little references to it at the beginning. And then we call that foreshadowing, but I think a lot of our authors put their foreshadowing in later during a second draft. Like, oh, now I know what I want to happen at the end, and put in little hints. Does that help? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
Hey, yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so those are your 7 steps. And now you may have to correct me here, Alex. I looked on the website and I thought it said that the length was 500 to 1,000 words, but you mentioned 3,000, so I may have misread that. So don't take
to 1,000 is correct. That's
okay. Okay, great. Then maybe I just heard wrong. And then these are the 5 criteria, and hopefully they'll make more sense. We were just talking a little bit about ways to achieve coherence just now with Alex's terrific question. and it also pertained to effective detail. I don't think anybody here needs to worry about originality. What I've been hearing is stunningly original. And so the effectiveness of the recognition scenes, according to this workshop, can we tick all 7 boxes? You know, is it all there? And then the relevance to Jane Austen's teenage writings. I'm just going to, for the sake of the people who got here a little bit late, I'm going to go back to the beginning of the slideshow. If I can. I'll just start it again. And maybe we should end by giving our attention to Jane Austen, because she's the reason we're here. And then this is her recognition scene. So for that second criteria, if you want to, you know, come back and study Jane Austen's recognition scene and see what she's doing that you would like to try yourself, I strongly encourage you to do that, because she's the best.
All right.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Thank you so much.
I look forward to hearing, to reading the final products. I hope that both of you, Kashfi and Anjali, will submit. I just don't look forward to having to compare them, but I certainly want to enjoy them. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming and spending the evening with us, and thank you, Lesley, for
My pleasure.
your
Yeah.
expertise. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can always reach out to either me. I think my email was maybe on the registration, or you can reach out to JASP. I mean, we're always very happy to answer any questions, and hopefully any questions can be answered by the contest website, but if not, always feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, that's great. And I hope to meet some of you in June at JASP. If you're going to be there in person, that would be very exciting.